I can't believe it took us 12 weeks of time trial videos on 150cc to finally come to a track that's in my top 8. And man, do I absolutely love this track. It's got awesome music that shifts in pace and intensity the further down the mountain you get, a really cool aesthetic, and an interesting track design that allows for a ton of advanced strategies. If it weren't for just one small piece of the track, and I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, this would easily be my favorite course in the entire game, but I'm getting just a little bit ahead of myself here. Welcome to part 12 of Basic Training, where we're going to cover everything you need to know about Mount Wario on 150cc. As always, we're going to cover the recommended builds, mushroom strats, coin lines, and other advanced tips and tricks to help you start mastering the course. Mount Wario is a pretty technical course, so we're going to break the tutorial down into 3 sections. First, I'll go over a baseline level 1 version of the run that most people should be able to replicate with just a little bit of practice, and this should allow you to beat the staff ghost without too many problems. After that, we'll get into the level 2 version of the run, which incorporates strategies that I use in my current PB. And finally, in level 3, I'll cover the world record strategies. Praise be to the algorithm and its infinite wisdom. I would really appreciate any assistance in quenching its ravenous hunger for thumbs and comments. And also, it'd be pretty cool if you subscribe to me too, since all of that stuff helps the videos and channel get exposure. With all that out of the way, I hope you're prepared to handle the avalanche of knowledge I'm about to drop on you, because we are hitting the slopes of Mount Wario. If you're just starting out, I recommend using Dry Bowser, Wild Wiggler, Rollers, and Cloud Glider. Even though there are quite a few twists and turns on this track, which would make it an ideal course for our normal tryhard build, to maximize the potential of that build, you really need to have a decent handle on some of the advanced drifting strategies, and the Dry Bowser build should tide you over until you get there. That being said, just because I personally prefer the tryhard build of Waluigi, Bitty Buggy, Rollers, and Cloud Glider, that's what I'm going to use throughout this video. However, all the strats that I'm going to use in the level 1 version of the run can be replicated pretty easily with the Dry Bowser build. Alright, that's enough of that, let's check out the track. So, first things first, we're going to start by using a mushroom at the very start of the run by holding down the item button before the race starts. The reason that we do this is that there aren't that many mushroom spots in this track, and using a mushroom at the very start allows us to get to top speed as quickly as possible. After that, it's just alternating right, left, and right drifts followed by a trick off the ramp here. Even though there's a ton of coins you can get if you go on the left-hand side of the track here, it turns out that you can maximize coins pretty quickly on this track anyways, so we're just going to take the turn as tight as possible and go off the ramp on the right side. If you can, try and build up a super mini turbo before you get to the ramp, but in either case we're going to want to trick off the left-hand side of the ramp so that we can take a tight line around the next turn. The next step is to build a super mini turbo around this hairpin style turn, and once that runs out, you can start another right drift. However, you want to immediately start holding left on the joystick to widen your drift angle. Once you've been drifting for a little bit, start holding down right on the joystick and aim for this little ramp on the right hand side of the track. To get the timing right for these sorts of things, it can often help to set a visual cue for you to start turning. The visual cue that I use is based on Waluigi's position in relation to the ramp and the giant cliff to its right. Once Waluigi's head is directly underneath the little gap between the cliff and the ramp, that's when you're going to want to start holding right. Doing so will allow you to do the trick as early as possible and also set you up so that when you land you're already going more or less straight down the track. Notice how after I land I don't have to turn at all. Now for the next bit, you want to get slightly right of center of the anti-grav pad, and then as soon as you get to the anti-grav pad, start a right drift. You again want to start holding left on the joystick to widen your drift angle, which is going to allow you to grab the 4 coins here. And once you get the mini turbo, release and trick off the ramp. Keep holding down the drift button and left on the joystick while you're in mid-air so that when you land, you'll immediately start drifting. This is going to allow you to build up a mini turbo more quickly. This technique of holding down the drift button in mid-air so that you can land in a drift and build up mini turbos more quickly is called a slip drift. And I'm going to reference this technique a few more times throughout this video. This next strat will require just a little bit of practice, but it's not super difficult to learn. What you want to do is trick off the glider ramp and then start holding down on the joystick to increase your air time. The goal is to land on top of the orange boost ramp here and trick off of it so that you can keep your glider out. If you don't hold down on the joystick after tricking off the glider ramp, you're basically guaranteed to fall into the river below, which isn't the end of the world because you can just trick off the little cliffs here, but it's going to be a bit slower. Now, after tricking off the orange boost ramp, do some mid-air maneuvering to land directly on the little cliff so that you can trick off of it while again keeping your glider out. I'm not exactly sure why this is faster, I just know that it is. We're more or less in the clear for a little while now. Trick off the orange boost ramp and build up a mini turbo around the turn, trick off the top of the stairs and do another slip drift around the left turn. This next section is also pretty straightforward. There are 3 sets of orange boost ramps, and your goal is to basically hit as many of them as possible. Hopping over the water right before each boost ramp saves a little bit of time because the water is moving sideways, which will take away some of your forward momentum. Other than that though, there's really not that much to talk about here. After tricking off the left-hand side of the ramp, stay on the left side of the split path. And now we're finally going to use our second mushroom to cut through this big section of off-road snow. Trick off the glider ramp and then just stay in midair until you pass this first log right here. If you're feeling brave, you can land a bit earlier and try and trick off of it, but really I just recommend staying away from all the logs for now since they're more likely than not just going to mess you up. Now once you land, the rest of the logs make a pretty nice path for you to follow to get from the middle of the track to the right hand side of the track. Once you get to this first big tree on the right hand side, start a right drift and just hug the wall as tightly as possible. Build up a super mini turbo to finish the second section of the track, and everything else from here on out is actually pretty easy. After tricking off the 2 ramps at the start of section 3, we're going to come up on a little slalom bit here, and all we have to do is do alternating mini turbos in a left, right pattern, while making sure to grab coins if we need them. One thing that's important to point out is that for the very first right drift, you want to include a slight delay between when you release the mini turbo and when you start the drift. If you try and hop to start the right drift too early, the way the course is laid out, it's likely that you're going to get just a little bit too much airtime, which can mess you up. Once we're done with the slalom portion of the track, we're going to come to a section with a bunch of little snowy hills. Your goal here is to get as many tricks as possible off of them. If you're trying to press the trick button to accomplish this, the timing can actually be really annoying, so what I like to do is just shake the controller to trick. I've talked about this in other videos, but shake tricking is useful because it actually kind of buffers your trick inputs, so if you're constantly shaking your controller as you go down this section, you're more or less guaranteed to get 4 or 5 tricks, which saves a crazy amount of time. The rest of the track is basically just a long straightaway. I think it kind of goes without saying, but I've got to fill the time while we get to the end of the course, so make sure to get all the boost ramps. And also make sure to go through all of the rings after coming off the glider ramp. You can basically just keep your joystick in neutral until you land, and then slightly before getting to the last big snowy hill here, we're going to start a left drift and use our last mushroom over the hill to finish off the track. Now before we look at the full run, let's quickly recap the coin lines here. You get 3 from the very first turn on the track, and 1 more from the ramp. The next 4 come from the very start of section 2, and after that we don't really get any more coins until after the place with all the orange boost ramps in section 2. You can actually grab another coin in the tree section, but since I'm suggesting that you avoid all the trees for now, the last coin you're probably going to be grabbing is at the start of the slalom bit in section 3. So that's it for the level 1 version of the run. Let's take a look at how all these strats are put together. My end time here was a 151.996, which is about 12 seconds ahead of the staff ghost and 9.5 seconds behind world record. And this is all without really having to do any advanced strategies at all. So why don't we build on what we just learned and go over some of the strategies that I use in my current personal best. It all starts with the first ramp. Rather than release the mini turbo and then trick off the ramp, it's actually a little bit faster to release the mini turbo and then trick at the same time. Another major difference in section 1 is that I slip drift on basically every turn here since, like I mentioned before, it allows you to build up levels of mini turbo more quickly. This is particularly important for the second ramp since if you're good at soft drifting, the slip drift will actually allow you to build up an ultra mini turbo around the hairpin turn. If you're going to go for that, then what I suggest you do is a single alignment hop to the right before starting the right drift here, before the gap jump. The gap jump itself is also different in my PB though. If you recall, I suggested starting to hold right on the joystick once Waluigi's head was directly underneath the gap between the ramp and the cliff, since this allows you to trick off the right hand side of the ramp. It turns out that if you're able to build up a super mini turbo, you can actually hop directly off the track with more than enough speed to clear the gap. The benefits of this are that the super mini turbo is stronger than the trick boost and that you land much further down the track than you would if you just did a trick. It's not super hard to learn how to do this either. All you have to do is adjust your visual cue a little bit. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you look at the rock, there's a kind of shadow here that indicates that there's a bend in the rock. Alternatively, if you look at the snow up here, you can see a similar bend. Once Waluigi's head is in line with one of these cues, then you can start turning and you should be able to build up a super mini turbo before the gap. Then all you have to do is just hop. Now let's compare the level 2 version of the strat to the level 1 version of the strat to see how much time we saved. Now the fun's not over yet though, because the start of section 2 is totally different than the level 1 version of the run. Just like before, we start a right drift once we get to the anti-grav pad. But now, once we build the mini turbo and get to the second coin, we want to release the mini turbo and then start a left drift to grab the next 2 coins. Now here's the really crazy bit. Rather than go off the glider ramp like before, we want to try our best to just drift off this arrow right here and keep holding down your drift button and a hard left on the joystick while you're in midair. And yes, it's also important that you're drifting off of this arrow. The reason is that if you took the turn in such a way that the left drift allowed you to get the 2 coins, then when you go off the ramp, you'll keep a lot of your forward momentum while dropping into the river below so that when you land, you'll have an ultra mini turbo built up. And when you release it, you'll immediately start going forward really quickly. If you drift too far to the right of the arrow on this ramp, then almost all of your movement is going to be horizontal. And you might even land on the glider path, which needless to say, is pretty much game over. Now remember, after drifting off of this ramp, keep holding down the drift button and left on the joystick so that you can build up your ultra mini turbo in midair. When you land, release, and then trick off of the little cliff here. Then we're going to do another slip drift so that ideally you can build up a mini turbo before the next cliff. We're going to mini turbo trick off of that cliff, and then drive straight and trick off the next ramp. For the last cliff, we're going to land in another slip drift so that we can mini turbo trick off of it. Okay, that was a lot of information, so let's walk through this one more time. At the anti-grav pad, start a right drift, build up a mini turbo, and release into a left drift. Drift off of that arrow that we talked about and keep holding your drift to build up an ultra mini turbo. Then the pattern is, do a normal trick, a mini turbo trick, a normal trick, and then another mini turbo trick. Now once we get to the orange boost portion of section 2, it's more or less the same as before, except that if you get here on good pace, it's possible to build up a mini turbo after the first orange boost pad. If not, don't worry, it's not super necessary. Now prepare for the pain. Once we shroom through the shortcut, rather than take the easy way where we safely get to the right hand side of the track, we want to force ourselves to land as soon as possible so that we can start tricking off all these stumps in the ground. There's 4 stumps that we want to trick off of. The first is the very first one on the far left-hand side of the track. The next one is the stump that's directly in front of it and facing with the fat side to the right. The third one is the stump with the fat side facing to the left that's right in front of the big tree. And the last one we're going to trick off of is the second to last stump with a coin on it. When we trick off of this last stump, we want to turn our cart slightly so that we're facing this big gap between the tree and the right-hand side of the wall so that we can take the turn like before. As you can see, I almost messed it up here, but fortunately I managed not to kill my run here. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have a whole lot of advice in terms of setup to make sure that you can consistently get this strat. The best advice I have is to try and land as early as possible so that you can go straight off of the first stump. You basically want to avoid messing with the joystick as much as possible until the very last stump, at which point you're going to turn right. Otherwise, you're almost guaranteed to get flung into a tree or into a wall. But yeah, other than that, unfortunately, you just need to watch some high-level runs and try and copy what they're doing. And after that, it's all about practice, practice, practice. This is honestly one of the most frustrating bits of track in the entire game, and for reference, I get this correctly about as often as I get the Shy Guy Falls Shroomless shortcut, so that should give you some indication of how annoying this section of the course can be. Once we've gotten out of the tree section, the rest of the course is more or less the same as before. I don't usually do this, but since my PB is so different from the level 1 version of the run, I think it's worth it to actually check out the whole thing in real time. So let's take a look. Alright, since this video has already gone on for quite a while, let's just talk about some world record strats rapid fire. World record forgoes the mushroom at the beginning of the run in favor of building up a mini turbo and then sets up for an absolutely insane mushroom strategy that you'll pull your hair out trying to learn. The gap cut looks similar to my PB, except that you might notice they clipped the wall a little bit. Believe it or not, this is actually intentional as it gives you a little bump forward, but as you can probably imagine, it's very precise and very annoying to try and learn. Next up, the orange boost portion of section 2, they do a bit more fancy mini turbo strats than I do, and then when going off the glider ramp after the second mushroom, they actually build up another mini turbo so they can do some glider vectoring strategies and follow it up with a slightly different tree tricking setup. Next up, world record takes advantage of the bounciness of the terrain to do a mini turbo trick off the second ramp at the start of section 3. After that, they do more glider vectoring during the ring section, and then for the final mushroom, they intentionally bonk into the wall to help them build up a super mini turbo before finishing up the lap. Whew! Alright, and that's everything you need to know about Mount Wario on 150cc. Like I said, an amazing course whose only real flaw is the tree nonsense in section 2. Unfortunately, it's a pretty big flaw that single-handedly keeps the track from being my favorite course in the game. I know this was a bit of a longer video, but this course is, in my opinion, one of the more technical non-baby strat courses in the game, so I think that the added detail is definitely worth it. If you agree, don't forget to like the video and drop a comment down below to let me know. And also don't forget to subscribe since I release a new video pretty much every week. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to do some basic training, and as always, I will see you in the next video.